in the case of Taylor Swift, there was evidence of people registering to vote, especially after she endorsed. So that actually goes against what you're saying, really, that it doesn't bear out that people do follow the celebrities into the polling booth.
I think the gold standard was Oprah Winfrey, wasn't it, when she backed Barack Obama back in 2008? Of course, though she didn't back him in the election against John McCain, she backed him in the primaries. That's how he secured the nomination, people would say. So it clearly has had some effect, but interesting that the research would suggest it's not making that much of a difference. I think the other figure is 11% for people who say they've been persuaded to change their vote because of a celebrity endorsement.
Yeah, Oprah Winfrey out tonight.
Yeah, she's one of the names on the list, so going to be interesting to see what we're talking about tomorrow morning.
Yes, it will be. Another question from Chris. What would a Trump or Harris win mean for the UK? Will it have a big impact?
Big question, Chris. I think at its most basic level, a Donald Trump presidency is a Keir Starmer nightmare. We've already seen how the Labour Party has some former and current staffers have come across the Atlantic to be involved in the Democratic campaign, much to Donald Trump's angst. I think the Republicans have filed a complaint with the Labour Party in the UK.
Quite a few that came over, over 100, wasn't it, that actually came over to help.
Yeah. And I think the big problem for them as well is they don't know where Donald Trump's going to go in terms of NATO, in terms of Ukraine. All of those things could be big headaches for Keir Starmer. But I think even if Harris wins, of course, there is the outstanding issue of a free trade deal between the US and the UK. The elusive trade deal that hasn't come along post-Brexit. For a long time it was, of course, resisted by President Biden because of ongoing issues over the Northern Irish border. And because of his Irish ancestry, he put a little bit of pressure on the UK government over that issue. So I don't think either Trump or Harris is offering a trade deal to Keir Starmer.
In terms of the personal relationship, if it were a Trump victory, it is quite problematic for the Labour government. We've had previous ministers, David Lammy, one in point, quite critical of Donald Trump. And as we know, Donald Trump can be quite vindictive. So there might be some scores to settle. He's already said that there are people that, he will be going after. I'm not suggesting that he's going to go after David Lammy or Sir Keir Starmer in that way. But it's difficult to rewind when things have been said, isn't it?
It is, and if you think about Donald Trump and then think about any other UK politician, who's the first person comes to mind? Boris Johnson. They were natural allies. In fact, I used to say to people, 10 years ago, if someone had told us there was going to be a period in history where Donald Trump was in the White House and Boris Johnson was in number 10 Downing Street, we would have suggested they need to talk to their therapist about that. We just didn't think it was something that would be possible. But they became great friends, of course, because they're very similar in their kind of erratic approach to politics. So there's a much more natural allegiance between the Republican Party and the Conservative Party.
Yeah, the two blondes.
Two blondes.
From William, polling in the last two presidential elections underestimated Trump in the 2022 midterms. The Democrats outperformed the polls. Who do you think the polls have underestimated this time? Well, the polls, I mean, for me, having been here in 2016 and 2020, 2016 was my eye-opener to the fact that the polls cannot be trusted in the slightest. Really, Clinton was a shoo-in, pushing ahead. Donald Trump, famously in Michael Wolff's book that he wrote about his time he spent with Donald Trump on the trail, when he actually realised that he was winning and he'd won, he went ashen, and Melania was off somewhere crying in the corner because even they had not thought that he could win. I was interviewing Republicans the day before who were saying obviously he's not going to win, but it will give us a chance to set out our stall. Nobody saw it coming in 2016.
Well, when you ask who do we think they've underestimated this time, I think our answer has to be hopefully neither side. Hopefully the polls are accurate this time and it is going to be really close. We'll find out, I suppose, over the next 24, 48 hours. But polling has become much more sophisticated as a result of what happened in 2016 and 2020. Elections are decided by people, but polls are decided by people and by pollsters. They, for example, used to only poll in the US on telephone landlines. They do now poll people using mobile phones. They do poll them online. They do door knocks. They do things they didn't do before. And they've added in all of these weightings to try and account for various discrepancies, because they have learned that it is university graduates, college graduates, who are more likely to respond. People who mistrust the government, far less likely to respond. So they weigh the result accordingly to try and find somewhere in the middle. So the danger in that, of course, is that they could overestimate Donald Trump this time because they underestimated him in 2016 and 2020, and that Harris is actually much further ahead than we think she is right now. But we're simply not going to know the answer until tomorrow evening.
Can't trust the polls. Can't trust the polls. In terms of the electoral system, we've already had claims from Donald Trump's side that there is electoral fraud and there is skullduggery at hand if he doesn't win.
Yeah, even in his rally today in North Carolina, he said, if you come out and vote, there's nothing they can do about it. Already raising doubt again in people's minds about the credibility of the result. We've already been told there is some chatter online from various right-wing groups who are suggesting they need to prepare to contest the election result. By all means, if it doesn't go their way, and we know how dangerous that kind of talk is. January 6th on the hill just behind us is still very fresh in people's minds here. But Donald Trump has been on this journey of preparing to contest this election since he lost the last one in 2020. The polls had barely closed in 2020 before he was accusing the Democrats of cheating, and how often have we heard the word cheating since then? It's just his mantra these days, and I think we're going to hear an awful lot more of it with litigation after litigation if the polls are as close as they're suggesting.
As well as the litigation, do you think that we might see it might deteriorate to violence on the streets?
I think that is the real fear. Law enforcement will be making preparations for that. Even in the last couple of days, we've seen barriers put up around the Vice President's residence here in Washington. So I think they are preparing for any eventuality. How could they not after what happened on January 6th? But I think at the same time, most of the contest may take place in the courts. Donald Trump has raised a staggering $90 billion to legally contest this election, already filed 130 cases. And that's despite the fact that of the 60 cases that were filed after the 2020 election, 59 of them have already been dismissed by the courts. And the only person right now in the United States running for this election who stands accused of electoral fraud is Donald Trump, ironically.
The irony. I have to say, in 2020, Washington, when we arrived, we were just surprised by the fact that it was all boarded up. You know, all of the shops were boarded up, and there was this preparation and sense of, doom that something was about to happen. But none of that this time. They haven't boarded up the shops. It doesn't feel like a city in lockdown in preparation for something that could kick off.
Yeah, perhaps. It's still a deeply polarised place, but what happened on January 6th probably shocked them to such an extent that many people would hope and perhaps even believe that it could never go that far again. But there is always the risk of that, and that is why we are paying close attention to the rhetoric we're hearing. And it's also interesting, Gillian, that fear can become contagious, because Kamala Harris had a very positive start to her campaign. I was here in the summer. She got that bounce. The momentum was with her. It was her election to lose, I would have said then. But she did gravitate for a period of time towards negativity, talking about Donald Trump as comparing him with Hitler, calling him a fascist. She has, in the last few days, pivoted back to the positive ground. We're told she's not going to use his name for the rest of the campaign.
No, last night she didn't mention his name at all, so we'll see whether she continues with that in Pennsylvania. She's there now. She has arrived in Scranton. Another question from Ralph. He says, will Trump modify his flamboyant and extremist rhetoric if elected?
I think we can answer it in a word. No. With Donald Trump, what you see is what you get. We've become used to it. In fact, we were discussing this earlier, how he paints us as the fake news, people like us. And sometimes we work so hard to push back against those claims of bias that there's a danger we lean too far in the other way and become tolerant of the rhetoric, because Donald Trump does get away with saying things that other candidates would simply not get away with.
He is held to a completely different standard, isn't he? The things that he says, you know, when he says the Democratic Party, it's a demonic party. He says that Kamala Harris is of low IQ. We simply wouldn't expect or accept that possibly from any other candidate, would we?
No, and I think it's because Donald Trump has this amazing ability to persuade his base and people around him that their cultures, their traditions, their very way of life is under threat. And when people feel those things are under threat, then they're prepared to put the justice system in second place. They will fight to retain what they believe to be, they've got this perception of an America, a golden era in America that is gone. Industrialization, anti-abortion, pro-guns, and to some extent they're prepared to tolerate, in fact, not just tolerate, but endorse Donald Trump's rhetoric, because they believe he's going to lead them back to this vanishing America.
One from Isla here. What is the key swing states' view on abortion, and how will this affect the election? It's only on the ballot in 2 of the swing states, isn't it?
Yes, it's on the ballot in Arizona and in Nevada. So one of those currently a red state, the other one a blue state. So I think it's probably going to affect the outcome in Nevada if it's predominantly a Democratic state. But it's worth, I think, reflecting on the fact that there are 7 swing states. So even though it's only on the ballot in 2 of them, it could still be a huge factor. The early figures for early voting, are indicating a massive increase in the number of women coming out to vote, and that's leading to lots of speculation that it's over the abortion issue. And we know why that is. This is the first presidential election in the United States since Roe versus Wade was overturned, the constitutional right to abortion, and we know the depth of feeling there is over that issue.
And it's an issue that pervades the other states as well. It's not just the swing states. Even if it's not on the ballot, it's certainly something that people are considering. It's not top of their priorities, though. Economy seems to be number one. Donald Trump forever asking, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? People saying that they don't feel that they have the money that they once had in their pocket today. So economy still at the top in terms of people's priorities when voting.
Yeah, so they do think about the policies a bit. Donald Trump talking a lot about immigration today, back in North Carolina, talking about economy as well, because he knows that plays with his base. But again, more than anything else, he talks about rights. And Kamala Harris talks about rights, but they are conflicting rights, because he plays a lot and leans a lot towards religious rights. And for a lot of people, their view on the abortion issue is based on their faith. That's why they would say they are pro-life, not pro-choice. But equally, on the other side, she's talking about reproductive rights. That's been a central plank of her campaign. So it's all about feelings, it's all about emotion, much more than it is about policy, I think, this election.
Also, looking at transgender issues, Trump has said that, you know, Kamala is for they and them, and I'm for you. He's really steering his base into that point, isn't he? And
it's another example of where Donald Trump is so willing to go to places where not another politician on the planet would be willing to go. They steer away from these controversial issues because they don't want to be viral on X, formerly Twitter, or any other platform for that matter. He's quite comfortable to go there because he knows that resonates with his base, because again, they're hankering for a lost America. They're hankering over something that they believe was their right to live the life they like and to be anti-abortion, to be pro-guns. That's the message he's hammering home all the time.
I was thinking about this before, that it seems that controversy and chaos is his superpower. I mean, he thrives on it, and you know, in a way that nobody else can. It would be to their detriment, but not to his.
some analysts describe these rallies as pantomime. They're certainly political theatre on a whole other level. It's just staggering how he rolls out claims that are so...
Well, today in North Carolina, he said that he was going to put 100% tariffs on Mexico, and then later, 5 minutes later, he said it was only going to be 25% tariffs on Mexico. Just doesn't really add up.
He tells us he's built the wall, then he says,
Yes.
I've built part of the wall, I'm going to finish the wall. He claims 13,000 murderers and
Yes.
drug lords have crossed from Mexico during the Biden administration. That has been clearly proven to be false on numerous occasions, but he just trots it out and people applaud it. And the thing that's really striking is when they applaud him making remarks like, wouldn't really be that fussed if a would-be assassin had to fire at the media in his or her effort to reach me.
Went through them. I mean, that's worrying actually, and that's actually dangerous when you've whipped up a crowd to such an extent that they're condoning that.
Dangerous and unbelievable from a man who survived an assassination attempt, because I think it's so easy to forget the remarkable journey we've been on to reach this point. The fact that Donald Trump didn't just win the Republican nomination, he faced no serious competition in the primaries. Then he became the first president to be convicted of a crime, 34 felonies. There's other cases against him in terms of sexual assault, civil cases, electoral fraud cases in the pending tray as well. He then survives an assassination attempt. Another assassination attempt is thwarted. Joe Biden drops out of the race. You couldn't write the script.
No,
and here we are
not.
on the eve of polling, when it's the moment of truth. America's about to find out who is going to be in the White House.
One thing, it's not been a single dull moment. This is so exciting, isn't it? I mean, it's just incredible. Absolute butterflies in my stomach every time I think about a possible result.
Our colleague Yalda Hakim describes it as the greatest show on earth, and she's absolutely right.
She is. David, thanks very much. Thanks very much to all your questions. That's your look at behind the scenes of our US election coverage.
Don't forget to stay with us for the rest of our coverage.
Oh yes, the rest of our coverage is not over.